oil cartel or sugar cartel, happens to be a banking cartel. They got together, they drew up the rules and regulations for their own industry to self regulate their own industry, is what cartels do. And then they sent it to Congress and they took off the label at the top that said banking cartel and they erased that and they said Federal Reserve Act. Congress passed it into law, and that's why we think it's a government agency, is because if you don't obey the rules that they set down for their own industry, you go to prison. And so it looks like a government agency. But basically, the answer to your question is it's a banking cartel.
While there's been some movements to combat this globalist totalitarian network, which has not only financed communist revolutions around the world, such as in Russia, China, and more recently in South Africa, which were all triggered by engineered social uprisings aimed to remove existing power structures using class warfare and amplifying socioeconomic and racial tensions enforced by a banker-controlled media. We can see the same pattern played out in America today, where manufactured civil unrest is used to erase history and promote cultural Marxism. In a nation which already promotes falsehoods in schools, starting from its name, which was not really based on the explorer Amerigo Vespucci, whose authentic name was actually Alberigo Vespucci, who only changed his name to Amerigo after his voyages to the Americas. In other words, Amerigo came from America and not the other way around. Not only was there an existing tribe in Nicaragua called Americ, whose root word was the ancient name for the land used by the natives of Peru, also known to the Maya civilization and attributed to the great feathered serpent creator deity, which they called Kukulkan, a deity which also had an equivalent by the Aztec civilization. According to Manly P. Hall, in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, quote, "These children of the sun adored the plumed serpent, who was the messenger of the sun. He was the god Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Gucamat in Quiche, and in Peru he was called Amaru. From the latter name comes our word America. Amaruca is, literally translated, land of the plumed serpent. The priests of this flying dragon, from their chief center, they once ruled both Americas. One of their strong centers was Guatemala, and of their order was the author of the book called Popol Vuh. Many Mesoamerican and Native Indian tribes also record in their oral traditions encounters and conflicts with giants, or at least very...
Yo, do y'all notice how they bringing up the tribes and everything in this? Like, this goes far back, guys. I want y'all to pay attention and listen, like, how far back it goes, how many loopholes. Like, listen, this shit is crazy. This nigga just mentioned the Aztec tribe and all that. It's crazy. I could have sworn, I'm about to go back, I could have sworn he mentioned the Arawak. I'm gonna see what he just said. Let me see. I gotta listen a little better because I was at the store when he was saying this. Let's go back a little bit. He took this John back.
Cultural Marxism. In a nation which already promotes falsehoods in schools, starting from its name, which was not really based on the explorer Amerigo Vespucci, whose authentic name was actually Alberigo Vespucci, who only changed his name to Amerigo after his voyages to the Americas. In other words, Amerigo came from America and not the other way around. Not only was there an existing tribe in Nicaragua called Americ, whose root word was the ancient name for the land used by the natives of Peru, also known to the Maya civilization and attributed to the great feathered serpent creator deity, which they called Kukulkan, a deity which also had an equivalent by the Aztec civilization. According to Manly P. Hall, in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, quote, "These children of the sun adored the plumed serpent, who was the messenger of the sun. He was the god Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Gucamet in Quiche, and in Peru he was called Amaru. From the latter name comes our word America. Amaruca is literally translated land of the plumed serpent. The priests of this flying dragon.
You know where I heard them mention the Cuckoo Clan at? I think it was the Black Panther. I think the mermaids, when they popped up on that last movie, they mentioned something about the Cuckoo Clan. And I've heard it in other places. I think I was, I might have checked. I think I was, I've heard the Cuckoo Clan. Where the fuck was it?
Dragon. From their chief center, they once ruled both Americas. One of their strong centers was Guatemala, and of their order was the author of the book called Popol Vuh. Many Mesoamerican and Native Indian tribes also record in their oral traditions encounters and conflicts with giants, or at least very tall people in the past. I also covered this topic in several videos, showing documentation regarding many discoveries of giant skeletons, which have been published in newspapers and then seemingly forgotten to history, except for mythology or mentions of giants in the Bible. In many biblical interpretations, the serpent is synonymous with Lucifer, the fallen angel thrown down by God, which literally translates to light bearer, a symbol which can be found in many parts of the ancient pre-Christian world. In his book, The Occult Connection to the Hidden Race, author Ken Hoodall proposes that, quote, then perhaps the land of the plumed serpent may also be known as the land of Lucifer, concluding that America means the land of Lucifer. While this interpretation may sound like a real stretch for many, it's an interesting concept when considered from the perspective of an interview that I recently stumbled upon, suggested to me by one of my subscribers, which uncovered some interesting details regarding the secretive meeting on Jekyll Island and events that led up to the creation of the Federal Reserve. The gentleman being interviewed is Tim Bentz, and the host of the show is Rob Skiba from a broadcast on Blog Talk Radio titled Canaanite Altars and the Federal Reserve. I'll leave a link to the full interview in the description, but now let's listen to a brief excerpt, and I'll leave it to the listener to draw.
For those of you that want to see the link to that video that he's talking about, y'all can check it on the link to this video that's at the description box at the bottom. Y'all can click on the link to this video, and then on his actual video, the link to the video that he's talking about is on there.
Draw their own conclusions.
I knew something about Jekyll Island. I had looked at some of the financial issues in the 80s and 90s. I was looking at some of the spiritual applications to financial things, but I really was not up to speed on the history of Jekyll Island. I had just heard it from something. I'd not even read, the book that's called The Creature of Jekyll Island. I'd not even read that book, but I was aware of something about Jekyll Island and financial.
Blessings, Sylvie on the go. Blessings, welcome to the channel. I'm not sure if I have any mods on here where they can share your link, but I hope you enjoy the content, and we're just here to spread awareness. Thank you so much for the support.
Financial stuff. So I went in my brother's house, got my computer out, and I just got on the internet and typed in Jekyll Island, and it's like, what's going on with Jekyll Island? And so I discovered when I got online that the Jekyll Island Club, which was this historical, multi-millionaires country club that had been built in the turn of the century, it had just been remodeled and reopened. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. When I got to the hotel, it was about 9 o'clock at night. And so I went in the restaurant and had a good meal, and went to my room and got some rest. And the next morning I went down for breakfast, and a different lady was at the desk, but she had a note for me and said that I had an appointment arranged with the museum director, and that he was blocking out most of the day to spend with me. So had my breakfast, and then when I went over to meet with him. So I go meet with the museum gentleman. His name is John, and when I go meet with him, I just introduced myself. I told him a little bit about who I was and what I do. We started talking. He was, of course, started out talking about the financial stuff, because this Jekyll Island is where the Federal Reserve banking system was birthed and conceived. And at one time, when it was functioning in the 1900s up to the 20s and 30s, some say 1/3, some say 2/3 of the world's wealth would vacation on that island. It was the highest conglomeration of wealth in a single place, very often anywhere in the world back in the turn of the century. So it just seems like a little island that's not anything significant at all now, but it's amazing to see the financial side of the history of that spot. And so I'm sitting there looking at some of the things that he's telling, just thinking about some of the things he's telling me. We went out, walked around, and he showed me some of the cottages that had been restored, and the club itself, and the tennis courts, and they had a pier where the boats would come up, and he's just kind of showing me the grounds, and then we go to the museum, and he's talking a lot about the financial stuff and the guys that built it, and each cottage was marked and named. Some of them had been restored, some of them didn't exist anymore, but they had like a sign that this is where this one was, and that one was built by J.P. Morgan, that one was Rockefeller's, and that one was just they had each one of them named. Well, they're all kind of native.
I want to pause it right here real quick and let y'all know. I'm also going to show y'all a little bit of the history of Jekyll Island. I think they spoke about it a little bit. I think it's on the first live I did yesterday, part 1 to this live. And for those of y'all that don't know, Jekyll Island is an island where they had a lot of slaves. I think at one point they ended up killing all the slaves that they had in there. I think to this day is an island where they still got slaves. And to me, my biggest question is, why would these men go to that island specifically, to have these secret meetings as they do? I don't know if anybody, could, finish putting all the puzzles together. Let us shorty know. Like, leave y'all comments what y'all think, how y'all feel. Make sure y'all hit, for those of you that are coming in, make sure y'all smash that like button for a shorty. Share her video, help her get into the algorithm, help her spread all the awareness that she's going to spread. We're going to be talking about things like this and much more.
Names. And then they're all, got some kind of a plaque on who the financial mogul was that had built them. And they're not really elaborate, luxurious mansions. They're just simple cottages for the most part, which was kind of interesting to know that the richest people in the world built them, and they were very low key and almost like a cabin in the woods instead of a luxurious house like you'd expect. And they all had Indian names. So I started asking him about the Indian history of the island, and he lit up. He just was like, that's what he really wanted to talk about, because he loved the Indian history. And so he takes me back to the museum, and he said, we got a lot of stuff on the Indians. He said this was actually like the government main community for a tribe of Indians that don't exist anymore. And that tribe was called the Timucas. And I said, well, that's interesting. My name's Tim. And anyway, I didn't know anything about the Timucas. I'm from Oklahoma. I've learned a lot of Native history, and I have some Native bloodline, but I did not know anything about the Timucas. So I just asked him, please tell me everything that you can tell me about them. There's something about the natives that I feel like I need to know. So he said, well, the Jekyll Island Club was actually built on top of everything that the Indians had. So they just kind of wiped the village out and built the club on top of it. So wherever the chief's house was, there was.
Now, y'all see how they wiped the village out at one point? Like, yo, the story is deep when it comes to Jekyll Island. It's very deep. Like, are these men that are coming to this island having secret meetings or racist as hell? Yo, I swear. In my opinion, but I'm not even going to use the word racist for the simple fact that, listen, a lot of us is racist amongst ourselves, and that we can't catch the grip of it. I can't even talk shit about the white man until we start fucking taking the grip of ourselves. Like, it's just crazy because we're building more 2 to 3 feet caskets now for our babies than what we was back then. No more unity. We got to come together to end all this bullshit. But you know what? Like I say, for those that are the fuck sleep, stay the fuck in bed. Once again.
The cottage now, wherever the council house was, there was now the Jekyll Island Hotel. And he said everything that's built and visible today is actually sitting right on top of something that was significant in the Indian village when it existed. So he said the fact that this whole place had to go into ruins and then be rebuilt and become an archaeological state park, he said it's actually helped us identify the native history because the club itself had almost erased that. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, let's look at the museum. I want to see some of the Indian stuff. So we're looking at arrowheads and spear tips and, just artifacts that they had found and pottery shards and things and seashells that they had. And he showed me all their stuff in the museum. He shows me some fragments of a weapon that was like an unusual bow. And when I say unusual, I mean that it was like a double curved bow. And that was a very unusual shape of a bow for a native tribe. I had never seen that shape before with an American Indian tribe. And I've seen a lot of bows and arrows. So I asked him, I said, this seems unusual. I've not seen this before. In Oklahoma, every native tribe, the bows would look like a single bow or just a single curve. I said, this is quite extraordinary, especially as far back as this tribe was. So he said, yeah, we found a lot of weapon type artifacts that we've not seen with other tribes. And I said, well, how do you know these were Native Americans? Maybe they were from somewhere else. He said, oh, no. They were Latina because they're well established along the Florida and Georgia coast. And he said, we got a lot of stuff in 3 or 4 states about them. And they were quite prolific at one time. So he said, we know they're Native Americans.
So basically what they're trying to say is that they came, they took over this island and claimed it as theirs. That's what they're trying to say. They got rid of the whole tribe. They cleared it out. They swiped them clean. They killed them all and just took over the village and claimed it. That's probably why they say that there's myths. That's why probably the myths and them theories and them what people are thinking and saying, them stories that are going around about the island being cursed, it probably could be true. Like it was owned by a tribe way before.
I said, well, all right, what else you got? He said, well, we got some skeletons. He said, you want to see the bones? And I said, well, yeah. That sounds, don't get to see a skeleton very often. I said, are they where we can actually see them, or are they buried? He said, no, they're visible. So they had a burial site that they had been very respectful for when they built the museum. When they found a burial site, they didn't move the bones. They left them where they were, and they just uncovered them to where they were visible, and then they built the museum on top of it. They did basically the same thing with the museum that the Jekyll Island guys had done with their houses. They put a piece of plexiglass over the burial site so you could see it, but they were still trying to respect where the bones were and not move them. And so I'm looking at 4 skeletons of the Timucua chiefs. And they knew they were chiefs just from different things that were buried with them. So all of a sudden I look and I realize, man, these guys are really tall. And I commented to the guy that, how tall are these guys? They look unusually large. And he said, yeah, they're all about 8 or 8.5 foot tall. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem like a normal Native American, especially the tribes that I'm familiar with. He said all the Timucuas were unusually tall, even the women. And he said we found other skeletons and parts of bones out in the grounds, and he said we've got pretty good evidence that nearly all of them were extraordinarily tall. And I said, well, what is how do you explain that in relation to other tribes on the Atlantic coast who were not? He said, I don't know. It is an unusual anomaly. He said, oh, by the way, I've got a painting that you might want to see. It's actually the copy of the original. We've got it under lock and key. So I got a painting that actually shows the Indians from a group of French colonists that came to the United States before it was the U.S. This was right after Columbus. He said that
basically they vanished everybody on this island and, preserved everything that they found and put it inside a museum that they built themselves, or probably had the slaves build. I'm sorry to say it.
It was the first colony of French folks that came over to try to establish a colony on the coast. And he said they landed in Jekyll Island and they had some interaction with these Indians. And then they got so appalled by what they saw and witnessed that they fled at night and ended up in St. Augustine, Florida, and established that city. So I said, were they the Huguenots who were the French group that established St. Augustine? He said, yes. I said, well, I'd like to see that painting then. So he pulls that out. I'm looking at it, and it shows the Indians in all their regalia, and they're dancing around and having some kind of ceremony, and it's got the fire, and it's a typical, either they're having a party or they're having a war scene, and it has some things with the weapons. So I said, gosh, this has got some weapons in it that clearly validates the archaeology that they found. And then I see an altar. And I'm going, I don't know of a Native American tribe anywhere in the country. I know some that had log houses or high places or worshipped, nature in some way, or had totem poles or that kind of stuff. But this one has a stone altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting. And so when you look at the details, two of the shamans or chiefs are holding a baby up by the ankles, and they're whacking their heads off and spilling the blood on this altar. Mm. And I'm like, sir, I don't want to be disrespectful of your training and archaeological understanding and history, but
it's crazy. Like I said, the history is deep. I know that a lot of other people, listen, they don't want to hear about this, but listen, this is the history. This is what happened before, the people that took over Jekyll Island, before the secret meetings and everything. This is the history of Jekyll Island, and it all goes hand in hand. And it's crazy how the people that moved in to make these clubhouses, these, hotels and these rooms and all this stuff are the same people that wiped out the Indians that lived at one point in this village. So, hey, if it's cursed, probably, maybe, I don't know. That could be a myth. That could be a theory. That could be a story. It could be, listen, at the end of the day, I bring this out here to bring awareness. I know a lot of y'all ain't going to give a fuck about it, but these are topics that do need to be talked about. Right now, everybody's so confused about what's going on with the submarine and everything. Listen, the Shorty's putting it all out at the table for y'all. Listen, I want to thank everybody that's rocking out with me, that's listening, that y'all more than welcome to come up. Like I said, it's an open panel. The link is right there pinned. I'm playing the documentary, giving my reaction, and this is what I think. Like I said, this is why I say that the people that went under my condolences to their family. I don't even know if their family has a part to, they knew about it, they're a part of it, or what the heck is going on. As y'all can see, this goes all the way back to JP Morgan, the Rockefellers, and much more. Y'all do your own research when it comes to this era. Y'all see who are the people that are in charge of it now, who are the ones that are going to these secret meetings, and much more. So all we got to do is just listen. So all of y'all that are rocking out with me, thank you so much, because like I said, y'all don't have to be here, but y'all chose to be here with a shorty and bring awareness, and that's what I'm trying to do. So thank y'all so much. But listen to what's happening. This is actually a real interview that happened to the guy that did the documentary on this village on Jekyll Island, where they're actually having these secret meetings.
I don't know of any native tribe that did what I'm seeing here, unless it was an act of war. And this is really, really unusual. And I've seen this type of scene with artifacts over in the Middle East. And I've seen weapons like this over in the Middle East. I said, are you sure this is Native Americans and not some kind of colony that came from over there? And he was convinced they were Native. And I said, well, I'd like to show you some things on a few websites that identify artifacts in the Middle East countries, and especially Egypt and Israel and Syria and Jordan area, and some of those spots where there's some of these ancient groups. And I said, this type of altar, this type of religious ceremony, and some of these weapons, I've seen them before over there. Well, he was quite interested in that because he loves Native American history, but he's starting to question, maybe I need to dig into this more. That was his comment. So I said, at that point, then I thought, I believe this is why I'm here. I needed to see this and hear about this. At this point, I'm not that concerned about the financial stuff anymore. I'm wanting to know, where is this altar? And so I asked him, I said, can you take me to this altar? I often pray over these things, and it's very beneficial for the land and for the country and for the people. Can I go to this altar and see it? He said, I can take you to the altar, but you can't see it. And I said, why can't I see it? Is it buried? He said, no, it's not buried, but it has a house built on top of it. I said, who would be crazy enough to build their house on top of a blood sacrifice altar? He said, well, Rockefeller was. So,
nice.
Okay, can we go there? And he said, yeah, it's just a short walk. Come on, man. We've actually, had already walked by it. So he said, I've got the keys. He said, normally nobody can go in. The way these things are set up, they're historical homes now. The state of Georgia owns the park. They lease out to another group, the hotel, to run, but the houses are maintained on the National Historical Register, and they're part of the state park. So you can't go in any of them without a guided tour or permission, but you can go look in the windows and walk on the porches and walk all around them. And they're set up inside just like they were when they were actually being used back in the 20s and earlier. So we go over there, and he's got the keys, though. So we go into the house, and he takes me into the parlor, and he says, well, I know you're
But y'all people, he mentioned the Rockefellers again, even though he's talking about the tribe and everything. But it's crazy, though. He has a good question. Who would be crazy enough to build a house, cottage, anything on top of a blood sacrifice altar?
the praying guy, so you probably would like to have a little time to pray. He said, you're standing right on top of the altar right now. This is the room that is built on top of it. He said, I'm just going to go over here and sit down for a few minutes and read the newspaper, and I'll let you pray and do whatever you need to do.
Now, this parlor, that's where those guys, J.P. Morgan and all those guys, actually conceived of the Federal Reserve, right? Right over that altar.
That's exactly right. It's the room that they were sitting in when they drew up the entire legislation and plan.
So basically, everything was built on top of that altar right there on Jekyll Island. All this happened. Jekyll Island is located somewhere in Atlanta. I forgot where it was. Right now, I'm just like, damn. Like they were that bold. They had their cojones were that huge. Real shit. Like, damn.
Plan to pass it that became the Federal Reserve Act.
Wow.
So this was the conception of the Federal Reserve banking system on the parlor sitting on top of a blood sacrifice altar.
Where babies were sacrificed.
Yes. And so all of a sudden it's like, wow, no wonder our banking system has so much corruption in it, even when people want to do the right thing, you know.
No kidding.
And so, just being a banker is not an easy job, but it's like not all of them are bad guys.
The whole system was built on corruption. It was built on corruption. It's not going to really go nowhere.
But it's like, wow. And that was not what our founders set up. That took over. It usurped the authority of the way our founding fathers suggested that we bank as a country. And even the way it was passed had a lot of, things that didn't seem right about it. But the idea that it was conceived like this, I'm going, this is not just a bunch of wealthy guys that got away for a vacation and came up with a profitable business plan. This has got something diabolical, something occultic about it, something evil that's wrapped up with it.
Yeah.
And so even if it had been a good idea and something beneficial for the country, which many would argue that it was, this demonic power must have gotten into it, because they didn't just create a bank, they created a banking system that every one of us have become subject to. So think about this. We've got a piece of money that wouldn't be of any value whatsoever if we didn't attribute value to it. Our dollars are only worth something because they're measured against something else. And the problem worldwide is every nation today, every nation is operating with fiat currency, and we're the ones that taught them how to do it. The change that the Federal Reserve did was not just to change the facial picture on the money. What they did is they took the right that our Constitution gave to the Treasury Department to print the money and set the value thereof. And they said, let us print it for you, and then we'll loan it back to you. Right. Think about the stupidity of that. If you just think wisely, I'm already making something with my own hands, and then somebody else comes to me and says, let me make that for you, and then I'll loan it back to you.
At interest.
Why would I do that? It's mine to start with. I don't need you to print it for me and then charge me interest to have it. But that's what we did. We set that up on a national scale. And where was the voice of the righteous when that happened? Why was there not a public outcry? It forces us to have debt, or we have no economy.
Yeah.
You cannot buy anything in this country without a debt being created, because if you buy something, that's the reason they print a dollar. So you buy a house and you ask for a loan, they print the money so they can give you the loan. That creates debt whether you are borrowing or not. Every sale, every transaction, every exchange has to create a debt now to be done. So that is not necessary, but it is something we chose to allow.
And unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, the show cut off right about this point in the broadcast.
My name is Robert Sepper. I'm an anthropologist. My published work is
Shout out to Robert Shepard for bringing out that, documentary on the whole history of Jekyll Island, a little summary of the secret meetings. He brought a little